Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NHLCA GM panel, NHLCA Coaches Clinic 2021. I'm Kevin Weeks of the NHL Network, and I'll be your host and moderator for this great panel that we have with our esteemed guests that have a wealth of experience, a wealth of knowledge, of course, that expertise, and they are so well-versed in what they do. They've been around the game a long time. Some of the successes include working for and having a ton of success, of course, with either Team Canada, Team USA, in some instances both, internationally, not to mention a wealth of Stanley Cup playoff success, Stanley Cup playoffs itself, Stanley Cup final, winning Stanley Cup final, hoisting the Lord Stanley's Cup, just to name a few things. We're very fortunate to be joined by Kenny Holland, who is the general manager of the Edmonton Oilers. Of course, a lot of you would know him from his amazing run, unprecedented, that he had with the Detroit Red Wings as the architect of that original six franchise, and he's tasked with doing some of that up in Edmonton right now with two of the best players in the world in Connor McDavid and the German, that is Leon Draisaitl. In addition to him, he has one of his former staff members in Jim Nill, who's doing an amazing job with the Dallas Stars as well. They reached the Stanley Cup final last year and had an amazing run in 2020 last season by reaching that Stanley Cup final ultimately against the Tampa Bay Lightning. He too was a great member of that Detroit Red Wing organization. We also have somebody that's done an outstanding job of hockey, especially in the South, in Don Waddell, currently the general manager of the Carolina Hurricanes, who are one of the best teams in the league right now, and one of the most exciting teams, of course, and also disproving to a lot of people, as is Jim Nill, that hockey can and does, more importantly, thrive in the South. And the Carolina Hurricanes have been very exciting to watch, of course, a lot of great young talent. Don Waddell also goes back to his days with the Atlanta Thrashers, having been the steward of that franchise. I have to say, I do miss playing in Atlanta. I love that building, Don. The Phillips Arena was a sweet building. So playing in that Southeast at that time, I enjoyed playing against those guys. But nonetheless, you're doing an outstanding job right now with the Canes. And again, for a lot of you that are tuned in, and a lot of you coaches, we have upwards to 1,000 of you coaches, not only here in North America, but around the world that are going to be tuning into this. And we're very fortunate to be joined by these three esteemed guests that we're going to try to get as much information as we can for you great young coaches, for a lot of you that are aspiring, some of you that are in pro already and aspiring to continue climbing from the American League, some of you in junior, college, and of course, a lot of you that are at the NHL ranks. So this is kind of a wide net in terms of our viewing audience, and so many of you that are either aspiring to get there, almost there, and some of you that are there. But one thing that's important is we're all in this great game together, and all of us have our own respective roles in the game. So as lead analysts on the NHL Network, it's my distinct privilege to have our three guests. I'll start off with Kenny. Kenny, how are you doing up in Edmonton? What's the good word? How are things going on your end?
Good. Kevin, nice to be with you, and look forward to spending an hour here. Donnie and I worked together in Detroit too. I don't know if you know it, in 1997, 98, my first year as general manager, I hired Donnie, and then Donnie left to go to Atlanta, and Jim Nill became the assistant. So I'm very honored and pleased to be on this panel with two guys who we all worked together and had a lot of success together.
Absolutely. And Donnie, I'll let you take it from there quickly.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. It's my first NHL job was working with Kenny and Jim. Kenny showed me the ropes from the NHL, and Jim was one of the best scout evaluators, and I learned a lot from both of them in a very short time. And now we come some 23 years later, we're back together.
And Jim?
Yeah, Kevin, thank you. And thank you to the Coaches Association for having us on board. I just don't like when they start talking about 23 years later and 26 years later, but that is life. But we've had some great times together, all three of us, and I've learned so much. In the end, it's all about relationships, and that's one of the most important things. So thank you again for having us on.
Our pleasure. And to that end, with the relationships, Kenny, I kind of walked them into that for you, because that means when the world resumes and gets back to normal, they both will owe you a steak dinner at least, maybe a steak and a bottle of wine at least. So I just walked them into that for you.
Thank you.
But all of that to say, let's go with Donnie first in this one. Donnie, why don't you tell us from your perspective what it's like working with the coaching staff and some of the direct kind of communication, lines of communication that you have working with the coaching staff down there in Carolina. I know two of them very well, of course, and the great Rod Brindamore, your head coach, who's done an amazing job, and Jeff Daniels, who's done an outstanding job too. Both of them were teammates of mine down there in Raleigh. But why don't you speak about what the lines of communication look like for each team? It's unique, but what about from your perspective?
Yeah, I really feel like, I want to be around the coaches as much as possible, good and bad. It's easy to be around there in the good times, but when you have some tough nights and some tough losses, you want to be there. And, I think you build that relationship with them, not only in the locker room or in the coach's room, but, the dinners you have, the time you spend on the road, you want to make sure I'm not there in the locker room. Those guys are. I don't need to know everything that happens in the locker room, but they know they're going to tell me what I need to know. And I truly believe that communication between the general manager and particularly the head coach is so important, because I have to feel that Rod feels he can come to me with anything, good and bad, and we'll figure out what the solution is. And being around, like I said, I have the same relationship with the assistant coaches. It's not like we're trying to make decisions without Rod or anything, but you get a feel for Jeff handles forwards. You talk about your goalie coach, Dean with defensemen, so you just want to make sure you always make yourself available. You come down there after games. Sometimes I don't say a boo, just listen to what they have going on. And other times they may, ask me my opinion about certain things that happen during a game. So I really feel being around as much as possible without interfering with what they're trying to do on a day-to-day basis.
And Jim, what about from your perspective?
Well, communication is a key. In coaching, it doesn't matter what you do in life, communication is a key. But, especially in our business, as Donnie mentioned, as coaches, they're on the bench, they're in the action all the time, and we're sitting up there, we're analyzing, we got our ideas, and it's important to get the feel for what they're seeing, what they're feeling. They're right in the middle of the heat. Things go on during games that other people probably in the stands and even ourselves don't understand. And to have that communication is so important. And I know with our staff, I really look forward to, after games, depending on the situations, I always go down. And I really, you want to be a listener. I think it's important to listen. The coaches, like as I mentioned, they were in the thick of it. There's a lot of battles that go on that ice, and a lot of things that we may not know. So you want to listen, you want to hear. And then it's the next day when you really probably put things into action, because there's a lot of heated situations that take place. But when you're in a game, these guys, they're in the battle. And you come down after a game, after situations, after a tough loss or something, the last thing they need is for somebody to come down and say, why did you do this? Why didn't you do that? I think it's important. Go down there, get a feel, get what's the level of the temperature down there, get a feel for things, and then the next day, let's sit down and talk and move forward from there.
Kenny?
Yeah, I agree with both. I think this year in the pandemic here was totally different for me from a managing standpoint. I was with the team every day. You couldn't leave Canada because of the quarantine. You couldn't leave the bubble, obviously, with the NHL protocol. So I was with the team every day. On a normal year, you come and go. You go to the World Junior Scouting. You might go leave for a few days, go to your farm team, join your scouts. But this year's every day. So obviously communication is it's always critical. For me, game day, I'm always probably in the coach's room before they go out for the morning skate, and then briefly after the morning skate, and then post game you go. And as Donnie said, you don't say a whole lot after the game. You do a lot of listening, and I guess depends on the result, the win or the loss. And then non-game day, down again before practice and after practice, and sometimes watch the team practice. Depends on what the day looks like. Sometimes don't. So just to try to keep the pulse of what's going on with the hockey team, and ultimately, as Donnie and Jim both said, the coaches are right in the locker room. We're not in the locker room, so we're in the next door. And as talking to Dave Tippett on a regular basis, I'm fully aware of everything that's going on with the team. And then, the way the offices are built in Edmonton, I've got two offices, one up, which is up more in the administration area, and then there's one down by the coaches. So it's my office next door to Tippett and Playfair and Gullickson and Schwartz. So at any point in time, I can pop into somebody's office to have a conversation, whether it's Dustin Schwartz about the goaltending or Jim Playfair about the defense. So as Jim said, communication is so important to be on top of everything that's going on a day-to-day basis.
Jim, let's come to you on this one. Speaking of that communication and the open lines of communication, how are the coaches able to kind of at least impact to some extent some of the roster composition? Now, ultimately, this falls with all three of you, ultimately with your decisions being managers, but how are the coaches able to maybe shape a little bit of what the roster does or doesn't look like?
Well, they're part of the team, and in the end, they're the ones that have to put the players on the ice. And I think it's important that they have to have a hand in it. It's probably where the game's changed a little bit. There's different decisions have to be made because of CBA. As we've been talking about the pandemic, we had taxi squads, decisions had to be made. So it really becomes a group effort. And as we talked about the first part, where we talked about how they're in the battle all the time, and they may know something about a player that we don't totally understand, and we have to be open to that. And they have to be part of that decision making. They're hired to put the best players on the ice. That's going to give them the best chance to win, and that's their job. And to be able to do that, they have to have some input in the roster. And in the end, there's other things that have to take place. Salary cap comes into play. Waivers may come into play. Draft picks, if you go to make a move, may come into play. So that's where I think the coach's job has changed a little bit. Also, they become a little bit of the management. As management, we become a little bit of the coaches. We want to know what's going on the ice. Why did you make this decision? I think it's important for coaches as they move forward because of this side of the business now. As I mentioned, the CBA, they need to know also why we're saying, well, we can't do this at this time, or we have to make this decision. And it's got to become a group effort.
Interesting. Donnie, what about from your perspective down there?
Yeah, I agree everything Jim said. And then, like he said, if you're not going to trade for a player and try to fit him in your lineup without having your coach's input, because this doesn't work. You also want to be careful. Coaches want to win today. They're not worried about tomorrow. They want to win today. So as Jim said, I've been with a lot of coaches that, draft picks don't mean a thing to them. Go get this player. Don't give up anything on our team. Give them our first round pick, and as a general manager, that's where we have to protect, not only watch out for what we're doing today, but for the future. But I totally agree that you're not going to go out. We go into free agency. We put lists together by our scouts. The coaches all get the same list. They put it all together. We come up with kind of a wish list. But again, I think it would be foolish if you're going to trade for a player and your coach doesn't have some input. The coaches all know each other in the league. They all call. That's good and bad, because sometimes they call and they find out a guy was not doing something right there, and it starts off with a negative opinion. But there's no doubt that I think you got to trust your coaches, that they're going to give you the insight that you're looking for for a player. And at the end of this day, the general manager's got to make that decision.
Kenny, well, you guys, up at Edmonton, you've got the beauty, the blessing and the curse, if you will, of having about maybe 3 million unofficial coaches that aren't on the coaching staff. And knowing that with family.
That's called passion. That's called passion.
Exactly. Yeah, I've got family up that way in that whole corridor in Alberta. But in saying that, what is it like from your perspective with your staff? Of course, the media is such a factor. The way in which the game's consumed back home in Canada is such a factor. But how do you try to just keep it as insular as you can to the conversations with you and your staff?
Well, I think when it comes to making the decisions about, the roster, I sort of look at it as the manager. I have the final say in the 23-man roster with input from the coach, and the coach has the final say on who's dressing on an every night basis and who they play with. And I get input on that. And I think that, the decision-making process really it's a process or an evolution. It's we're going into the off season now. We've all gone through our, your when your season's over, you go through your exit meetings and you get your players' perspective, and then you take some time to get the emotion out of the decision making process. And then I have Dave Tippett, or my head coach, go away and talk to your coaching staff, and then Dave Tippett and I will get together, and then we will talk about what I've got out of the exit meetings. Dave Tippett will do exit meetings. Sometimes we do them together, sometimes we do them apart. Then you have your pro scouts, and they're out there watching the other 31 teams. You gather information from them. You sort of work your way through a process over the course of when your season ends to when you get to training camp, and then once you get to training camp, you've sort of worked your way down to whatever decisions you've made in the off season. If you've made some trades, if you've made some free agent signings, where I try to be really careful and be involved is with young players. I think that I want young players to be playing, whether it's in the NHL, and if they can't play in the NHL and they're not waiver eligible, I want them to go down to the American Hockey League and play. And I think those are the things that I talk about with now it's Dave Tippett. I had Jeff Blashill, I had some other coaches in the past. So to build you build your roster with input from your pro scouts, from talking to my captain, now it's Connor McDavid, it was Zetterberg and Lidstrom and Yzerman, and getting their opinion, and then talking to the coaching staff, and you go through a process to eventually make decisions. And then as we talked earlier, day by day, starting in September, it's communication and talking to your coach on an everyday basis as you go through the season.
Great points there so far. I'm going to turn this one over to Donnie here. And Donnie, this is a little tailor-made for you. You're fortunate in the fact that you have Peter Mrazek, who was having an outstanding season. You have James Reimer, who was playing exceptionally well. And then a guy that one of my former teammates told me about, and Brett Harkins, who told me about this Nedeljkovic kid growing up who played minor hockey for him. He told me to keep an eye on him. And now all of a sudden you see the progression with him. And of course, winning the AHL Calder Cup in Charlotte. How are you able to, from your perspective, kind of juggle the fact that you've got the 3 goalie situation from a managerial standpoint? How are you able to kind of handle that in concert with your coaches?
Yeah, well, this past year, as we know, with the taxi squad, you're forced to carry 3 goalies, and unfortunately, Peter got hurt early on, and Ned was given a chance, and he took it and ran with it. I think if you're in a normal year, I think most of us agree you wouldn't want to have 3 goalies on the ice every day, but having a taxi squad, you could rotate guys off and on. But the coaches, the one point Kenny said there before, the coaches are trying to win every night, and the guys they feel are going to give them the best chance to win, the 20 best players. It's hard to argue with that. They're in there. They realize I've never been with a coach that's trying to lose a game, so he's going to play the best guys he possibly can. And when Ned came in and started playing like he did, we were fortunate. We had solid goaltending from all our guys when Peter was healthy. So, in a normal year, I don't think anybody would want to carry the 3 goalies. This past year, it worked out well because of the ability to carry that 3rd goalie.
And speaking of that, I mean, Jim, for you guys too, you guys are really fortunate in that your goalie coach, Jeff Reeser's done a really nice job there too. I remember seeing you guys last year at the Winter Classic, and all of a sudden the world changed. It started changing. Ben Bishop was Ben Bishop. We know he's been a really good goalie, a high-quality goalie in this league. Then he starts having a troublesome lower body injury. All of a sudden, Anton takes off. Then all of a sudden, Jake Ottinger, who I loved when he was at BU in college, he starts to flourish as well too. So what's that been like from your perspective there in Dallas?
Kind of the same situation Donnie was in. We've had 2 of the top goalies, and Ben Bishop, one of the top goalies in the league, unfortunately got hurt. Tried to come back and play in the bubble last year in Edmonton, couldn't do it. And Anton Khudobin, he grabbed it and took off. And we had a situation with Jake Ottinger, who really had only played 5 months. He turned pro back in October. And all of a sudden, because of the pandemic, we're shut down in February. And now we're going into the bubble. We lose Ben Bishop, and you don't know where your team's going to go. And in the end, it worked out great. It was a great experience for Jake Ottinger to be the backup, be on the bench, be practicing every day with NHL players, understanding what's going on. In real circumstances, you'd love him probably down the American League, getting another 40, 50 games in. But in the end, we start the season, and with the taxi squads, Ben Bishop unfortunately never came back, and Jake Ottinger grabbed it. And I got to give him a lot of credit. And Anton Khudobin continues to give us the solid goaltending. And, those are situations you never know which way they're going to go. And it's tough, but once again, that's where I give credit to our goalie coaches and our coaches having patience with them, and under different circumstances, making the best of a situation.
Now, listen, all three of you have been a part of organizations where you've had stars, you've had superstars. Jim, of course, you manage the stars that are the Dallas Stars, but figuratively speaking. But no, Kenny, you've had probably one, if not 50 superstars in Detroit, and all three of you having had roots there. How is it different for you as a manager with superstars? You've got Connor McDavid, everybody in the world. We got to go see him play. We got to go see him play. We got to go see Leon Draisaitl play. Darnell Nurse, to me, might win the Norris Trophy this year. How do you manage differently, A, and then B, how do you manage your coaches differently in terms of how you handle superstars?
Well, the first thing I would say, Kevin, we had a lot of success for a number of years in Detroit, and then I sort of set the path onto a rebuild, and then I came to Edmonton. We're better coaches and better managers with better players. So I'd love to manage a team that's got superstars, and feel very, very fortunate to be here in Edmonton with Connor and Leon, and the emergence of Darnell, who had a tremendous year. So, I think, from a managing standpoint, I think, first off, you want those types of players on your team. The coach is going to deal with them on an everyday basis. I'll deal with them, occasionally over the course of the year to get their thoughts as if, whether it's leading up to the trade deadline, I might talk to, Connor, whoever the captain at the time, but Connor and get, at the end of the year, I go to the exit meetings. I'm going to really value their opinion, because they are such big parts of the hockey of this hockey team. So, I think it's just, again, it's communicate, whether it's with your coaches or whether it's with your players. You try to have open lines of communication whenever you got to make some decisions.
Jim, I'm going to come to you on this for the first kind of take and perspective here. A lot of times I go back to being in the minors. I mean, all four of us on here have spent time in the minors, be it playing, be it for you guys coaching, GM, playing, a combination, what that looks like. Current AHL, old school IHL. And I remember being in the minors like, man, I just want to make the show. I just got to get to the show. I want to make the show. And, for a lot of us, we have that aspiration. But from the coaches that are tuned into this, a lot of them feel the same way. I've got buddies that I played with and or against that I speak to that are coaching in the KHL, that are coaching in the East Coast League, and the American League, and internationally as well in general. What do you say to them that you're looking for? What are some of the attributes when you're evaluating, coaches that you feel could be a part of your staff at the NHL level? What are some of those things that you look to see?
Well, I'm a big resume guy. And when we're talking about resume, it's where'd you come from? What have you done? How have you moved forward? And that's through good and bad times. We're in a business, there's wins and losses, and there's going to be some tough times. How do you deal with those? So you really want to, you go back and you look at people, where did they start? How they worked their way up. It's a good friend of ours, Jimmy Devillano. He always calls it snowbanking. You need to put in your time, and you need to be patient. And it's not easy, because as we all played the game. We've all been in the other part of the business now. You always see somebody else getting something that maybe you think you should be there, but it's important to stick with it. And the most important thing is probably building a foundation. You need to have that foundation. And when I talk about a foundation, as far as coaching and that, it's, you get down in the minors, you're doing you're booking hotel rooms, you're booking the bus, you're booking airline flights. meal's not right when you get to the hotel. You got to deal with that. You're dealing with so many different things that you think you just go in there to coach a bunch of players. We all want to be coaches, and we think we're going there just to coach, but there's so many other things that take place. And when you work through those things, it just makes you a better person. It's going to give you a stronger foundation, because when you do eventually get the NHL, it's a tough business, and there's going to be situations arise. And if you're not ready for it and haven't dealt with it, it's a situation might arise that you don't handle it properly, and it might be too late by then. So it's important to build that foundation. We always preach patience. That's, you talked about players in the minors. They all, you all want to get up there quick. It's the same thing with coaches. Have patience, stick with it. Good things are going to happen. And to me, that's the most important things.
Donnie, what about some of the unique challenges? I mean, you guys had your affiliate just down the road, about an hour and a half there in Charlotte. You had a ton of success down there. You guys have now made a little bit of a U-turn. You've changed the location. What are some of the challenges from your standpoint that have presented themselves that have you in a position where you need more constant communication? It's kind of a new path forward with your AHL team and the coaching staff that you have down there.
I think it's important to identify a person in the organization that's going to talk to the coach every day, and that's not going to be myself, because you're focused on the NHL. But the communication, it goes back to what we're saying, and the one thing that what Jim was saying is all right. The other thing I've always said about coaches when you're hiring coaches is you want to find out what kind of person they are. I had coaches come in and good or bad, I went through a few coaches in Atlanta. Coaches come in with all these drill books and stuff, and that's secondary to me. Find out what kind of person it is. But you want to surround yourself with good people. Good people will take you to good places. And the other thing that Jim pointed, it's a hard climb. It's a steep fall. If you try to get someplace too quickly, the fall could be harder to ever recapture. Our challenge is, again, when you're not in your same city with your farm team, you're further away. It comes back to hiring the right people, giving them the right support, but making sure that they feel like they have a direct contact to the NHL team. And so, one of my assistant GMs will handle Chicago on a daily basis, get in there. I'm a big believer of trying to see your farm team play as much as you can. Obviously, past year was much different. So I even said, the coach, you go to your farm team and the coach can use that, the boss is here tonight,
Exactly.
There's some tough trips in the American League, tough schedules, playing 3 games in 3 nights. So they look for motivation, and that's another big part of these young coaches. The motivation factor on a nightly basis is a huge challenge.
Great point so far. Kenny, listen, it was one thing in Detroit with Grand Rapids, Van Andel Arena, just kind of being up the highway there. It's a little different, although you guys have a sweet setup out there in Bakersfield, but Bakersfield is a flight from Edmonton. So with the team now being in California, that AHL affiliate, what does that communication look like for you as from a day-to-day or weekly standpoint? And what are you able to glean? Because it's not like, again, where you can go and stand up in Van Andel as often as all 3 of you would know. It's a little bit different now. How's that changed for you?
Well, it's changed significantly. Like I said, when we were in Detroit, it was a 2-hour drive over to Grand Rapids. You could drive over, watch the game, go in the coach's room for a bit before, 6:30, 6:15, and then, post game, and then drive back and be back in the office the next day. So, it's pretty well a full day of travel to get from Edmonton to Bakersfield. So, like Donnie said, Keith Gretzky, my assistant general manager, he's the general manager of Bakersfield. It's his responsibility on an everyday basis to work with Jay Woodcroft to make sure that what we want to happen now, their player development is going on, but at the same time trying to build a foundation of winning so that you learn to win at the American League level. And I think I'm with Jimmy. I'm big on resume. You gotta build a resume, and I think I look at Jay Woodcroft now, who Mike Babcock hired him in 2005, I think, in Detroit, when I hired Mike to be the head coach, and he was the video coach. And he was the video coach for 4 or 5 years in Detroit. And then he went with, remember in 2007, we'd lost in the third round at the Anaheim Ducks, and they went on and won the Stanley Cup. And Todd McClellan came to me after the season and wanted to meet. And, Todd had been a young coach that had a real good resume in the WHL, I think in Swift Current. Then he went to coach in Houston in the American Hockey League and had did a lot of winning and had a real good resume. And he wanted to know what was the next step for him to become an NHL head coaching candidate. And I said, Todd, just you're working under a good coach, Mike Babcock. If we can find a way to win the Stanley Cup, I think it would help get you an opportunity. And as fate would have it, the next year we won the Stanley Cup. And a couple of weeks later, Doug Wilson hired him to be the head coach of the San Jose Sharks. And he went from the San Jose Sharks to the Edmonton Oilers, and now he's in the LA Kings. So I think that you got to put in your time. You got to build your resume. You got to try to gather information from this seminar and all these things that the Coaches Association does to gather information for young coaches to gather information. I think is really, really, really valuable. So I just think you just got to continue to, as Donnie said, it's a hard climb in this industry. There's 30 going to be 32 head coaches in the National Hockey League, 32 in the world that get to be a head coach, and every staff's got 3 or 4. I mean, there's only about 100 coaches in the world that get to work in the National Hockey League either as a head coach or an assistant coach. And then there's, 31 head coaches in the American Hockey League. So, you gotta pay your dues. You gotta be patient. And I think, again, build a resume. And as Donnie said, you learn, you want people that have got a work ethic and they've got a passion and they're figuring out ways to be better at their craft. And I think along the way also we all need help. I look upon myself. I would not be a general manager if it wasn't for Jim DeVolano. When I was a young scout, he hired me as a scout in 1985. And then Neil Smith, who was the chief scout, went to New York Rangers, and Jim DeVolano talked me into staying with Detroit and making me the chief scout. And then he made me the assistant general manager. And Jim DeVolano recommended strongly to the Ilitches to hire me as the general manager in 1997. So whether you're in the coaching profession or you're in the profession of you want to get into the management end, we all need mentors, and we need people that help us along the way. So I think when you're a young coach, it's trying to build relationships, gather information, build a resume. And be patient and stick with it. And again, certainly you do need to have some success. You need to put some wins on the board. And I hired Mike Babcock hired Jeff Blashill as an assistant coach, I think in 2000 and early 2010ish or whatever. And he had done a good job. He won a championship, I think, in Indianapolis with the in that junior league. And then he went to Western Michigan. He turned that program around, got them into the NCAA tournament. Mike hired Jeff for a year. He was an assistant coach. And then somebody, I think it was Kurt Fraser, somebody left. And then I went to Jeff and I said, do you want to be the assistant coach in Detroit, or do you want to go back to Grand Rapids and be the head coach? And he thought for a day and called me the next day and said, I want to go watch. I spent a year working in the National Hockey League. I spent a year with Mike Babcock. I want to go back to Grand Rapids. And in a 3-year period there, he won the Calder Cup championship. He was named the American Hockey League Coach of the Year. And when Mike Babcock left to go to Toronto, to me, it was a natural progression to bring Jeff up to coach the Detroit Red Wings. So, we're all the same. It's build a resume, meet people, gather information, and be patient, because there's not a lot of these jobs in the world.
Great advice there. A lot of you'll go to the building, right? And I've seen you being a player and now obviously being this side of the business and speaking to so many of you, but you'll walk in, you got the glasses on, you got the trench coat on, maybe the team leather jacket. You're watching, I see you guys pointing. Sometimes you get excited. You're like, that's our guy. We really like him. Or you're scouting somebody that's not in your group yet. You're like, I really like him. But behind the bench now, what are you looking for behind the bench? I got a feeling for what you're looking for as players. But as you're evaluating and you're there at a World Junior, you're there at an HL game or, at an international game in Switzerland, let's say, or KHL, are you looking for composure behind the bench? Are you looking for fire behind the bench? Are you looking for a sense of calmness? What are some of the things you look for when you're evaluating the coaches when you're in the building as well?
Well, I'll jump in here. I just hired a coach, obviously, Kevin. When I came to Edmonton in May of 2019, I made a decision. Ken Hitchcock was the coach, and I made a decision I called Hitch and I said, I just thought I would like to start from fresh. And I asked Ken Hitchcock to be my advisor as I went through the process to hire a coach for the Edmonton Oilers. Hitch has been in the game a long, long time. One of the great coaches of his generation, and he knew everybody. Hitch could gather information that I couldn't gather. He had relationships. I've got relationships at the managerial level. Ken Hitchcock has relationships at the coaching level. So, we put down a list of about. I sat with Hitch one day, a couple of weeks into, I've been hired. I think it was May the 6th, and a couple of weeks later, I sat down with Hitch, and I went through a list of about 20 people that I considered to be a candidate to be the next head coach of the Edmonton Oilers. And there was was a small list of a few people that had never coached in the NHL that, through the industry were regarded as being the top young coaches in the game that were the next step was to be hired. And then lots of them had experience. And I'm coming here and I got, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl. It was, they'd missed the playoffs the 2 previous years. I felt the time was now. It's not like we could grow. So I felt ultimately going through the process that I wanted to hire a coach with a resume and worked my way down through. And, Dave Tippett, and I talked to Doug Armstrong, who's a good friend of mine, and Doug hired Dave to coach when they were together in Dallas. I talked to 5 or 6 players that had played for Tip, either in the National Hockey League and the minors, players that I knew good. A couple of them live out in the Okanagan that I know, and some through being involved with Team Canada, you meet some players. So I called a few of these players, and everything I got was nothing but positive reports. And then Ken Hitchcock did the same, talking to coaches, and ultimately went through the process. And I felt I wanted to hire a coach that had experience, because he was going to deal with superstar players and the pressures of coaching in a Canadian marketplace with the passion of the 3 million assistant coaches that you had talked about earlier. I just thought it was important to have somebody with experience behind the bench. So, I've also went through the process in Detroit when Mike Babcock left and made a decision that the Detroit Red Wings were going into, a little bit of a rebuild, and Jeff Blashill had worked with a lot of our Detroit's young players in the American Hockey League, and had helped them grow into NHL players. And he was a young guy that had coached at college, so I think it depends on where your team is at. As a manager, to kind of decide, do you want a more experienced guy? Is it time for somebody young that the players can grow with? So that's sort of the process that I went through here over the last 5 years in picking a coach in Detroit and also in Edmonton.
And Jim, listen, from your standpoint, obviously you guys, you've done it kind of at both extremes, where you had a really bright young coach, obviously, in Jimmy Montgomery. You then transitioned from Jimmy. Nice to see him land on his feet in St. Louis. And then you brought in somebody in Bones who, Rick Bowness has been behind the bench more than any coach in NHL history, which is incredible. But nonetheless, he's still very contemporary and still very much in tune with everything in terms of today's players and the way in which the game's played. What was it like kind of bridging that gap between the two? And maybe something that you can tell to a lot of our young coaches here about that experience that Bones has, and what's allowed him to have that unprecedented run in terms of his experience.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier when you were talking about when you're looking at the different coaches, and that I think the number one thing you said is composure. That's what I look for. Doesn't matter whether you're in juniors, American Hockey League, your team takes on the personality of a coach. And if a coach has composure behind the bench, is in control, you might be losing, you might have been up 2-1 and all of a sudden you're losing 4-2 in a game. How you respond as a coach is going to dictate how your players respond. It's so important to have the right person behind the bench, that there's got to be a calmness, but there has to be a firm, they got to be firm enough to maybe bench a player at the right time. Maybe somebody's not getting on the power play, and those aren't easy decisions to make with today's players. That they're wired, they're stallions. They want to go. They're racehorses. They all want to go, and it's not easy to step up and do those things. And you talked about Jim Montgomery and Rick Bowness, the transition there. And the one thing that really respects me with Rick Bowness is, you talked about, he's been one of the longest tenured coaches between assistant coaches and head coaching in the NHL. The one thing that he's always done, and I know this is one thing with Scotty Bowman too, is they're always willing to change and they're always learning. If you think something that worked for you back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s works, it probably doesn't work nowadays. The players are different and they respond different. Today's players are more skilled than they've ever been, but I think there's more teaching that has to take place than never has been. We have all these young players coming up now. The skill level is unbelievable. They've got the skill level, but the teaching still has to take place. As a 19, 20-year-old, they still have to understand the structure of a team, how a team has to play in certain situations. And that's probably the biggest challenge of coaches nowadays, is the teaching that has to take place. Coaches are so smart nowadays out there. You coaches are so well educated, the X and O's and everything else. In the end, the success is going to be how you deal with these players. They have to be dealt with a different way. And between the composure of dealing with them and the willingness to change with the times, I think are some of the most important characteristics that you can have as a coach.
That's awesome. In terms of, changing with the times, Donnie, I'll come to you on this. From a technology standpoint, speaking of which, we now have these different tools, which is how we're all here today, which is amazing, being in different places. But from your perspective, Donnie, how has technology kind of reshaped the relationship with you and the coaching staff, and then the coaching staff and the players?
Well, we have all these tools, right in front of us right now, and it's just not with the coaches, with our scouts. You give me a player's name, and then I can watch every shift that he takes. And we're fortunate at the NHL level to have these kind of tools. We can watch any player in 5 minutes, be able to tell you what kind of player he is. So, technology, I think in our world is always advancing, and certainly I'm not a big tech guy. I write a lot of big checks for tech stuff. That I do know, but
you're a tech guy then.
That's good. I like that. But I also think that you try to provide the tools.
Yeah.
Like we said, we always try to provide the tools that we can, and then how the coaches use it and utilize it is important. And technology goes. I think there's ways of technology that, goes right down what Jim and Ken both said, but Jim was saying about these coaches. We've all been to youth hockey games. We've all had kids playing youth hockey games, and the composure, watching these coaches at every level, how they handle their team. I think sometimes I've seen some things that I just would never hope I would ever see again in my life, out of, coaches trying to make a name for themselves at a young age, of how they treat their young players and how they treat the referees, the lack of respect they show for the game. To me, with these coaches, I don't care what level you are, you have to respect the game. You may not agree with some of the calls, you may not agree with some of the stuff going on, but you got to respect the game and the people in the game. That's at every level you possibly could be at. So, from the technology, I think, again, we're advancing every day in the way we do things. And, as long as we can over-tool it, analytics has obviously become a big part of our game. There's ways to use it to be very influential for your coaches and for your players you draft, but they're all tools.
Let me stay with you on this, and I'm going to ask this of all three of you, but I'll start with you, Donnie. The bubble, the new world, the challenges of the new world, the restrictions. I think I mentioned off the top, not being able to see some of our family, in the West Coast, out west, and back in Ontario, and even some of our family down in Barbados, not being able to see family. That's for us, and it's not unique to us. These are something that every one of us is going through either here in North America or around the world. But one key challenge, and I'll ask each of you, starting with you, Donnie, to the new environment and having been in the bubble, what's been one key challenge? Donnie, I'll start with you.
Well, probably number one is occupying time, doing things for your players that enjoy themselves, because everybody's missing their families. We had a lot of downtime. I mean, you're playing a lot of games, but there's a lot of downtime also. And, you try to do, every place that we've been in the bubble, you have extra hotel rooms, players are big gamers, ping pong tables. You got to occupy their time, because it's tough. It was tough. I know there's days on, days on, where you just get up in the morning, get tested, get breakfast, a few phone calls, and wonder what you're going to do the rest of the day. So just more off the ice, occupying players' time and keeping them feeling like they can accomplish something today.
Great point. What about for you, Kenny?
Well, as Donnie said, I think, it was, basically the bubble was you go to the rink to your house, and then you're on a plane and you go on the road and you're at a hotel to the rink, and trying to occupy their time. And also, get everybody to understand the importance of making those tough decisions on an everyday basis to make sure we follow the protocol, to protect not only you and your teammates, and also, but everybody's families. So, it's you start to do something, it's somewhat easy for a few days, and then you get into a week, and then you start to get into 2 weeks, and then as you go on, it's easier to let your guard down. So, we would have on a regular basis, our team doctor, we'd 4 or 5 times during the season, once every 4, 5, 6 weeks, our team doctor and I would just make a 15-minute presentation. Basically, sometimes, quite often was a reminder about the protocols that we have to stick by, because you get a little bit. We all got a little bit beat down by you couldn't go anywhere, and I think that you've got these are athletes in the prime of their career, and under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure, and they had a daily routine prior to the pandemic and prior to these bubbles to be the best that they could be, and also to kind of take the pressure off. And now you get into the playoff bubble from last year, and then you went into this year. We were in our own cities, but we're really in a bubble within our own city. It's a totally different way to be prepared. So I think that was the challenge, is to make sure that on an everyday basis, everybody in the organization, not only the players, the coaches, all the support people that were around your team, were making the right decisions to protect everybody, to keep COVID out.
And Jimmy, what about you guys? You guys obviously did this all the way to the Stanley Cup final last year. I mean, what a unique year. You know what that looks like from being in Detroit. But what under unique circumstances, how crazy was that for you guys in Dallas last year?
Yeah, actually, after going through that and then going through what we went through this season, it's hard to believe, but being in the bubble was probably better for us physically and mentally.
Interesting.
There was no travel. You're playing every second day. These guys, they just want to play. And so we handled that okay. You don't have to worry about the travel and everything else that goes with it. And at least in the bubble, we're allowed to go to a restaurant. Guys could go have a meal together. They could have a few beer together, watch some games. They kept busy that way. Whereas what we just went through this year with the travel and the quarantines and everything else, what I found the toughest part was the mental part. And sometimes, we talk about how good these players are, they're skilled, what they do and all that. A lot of times we forget the mental, what this took out of everybody. And it took a lot. And I'm not talking only players. It's amazing what our coaches, first of all, they're the leaders of this group. They did a great job, and what they had to go through. They got families also. There's things going through. Every morning, we do our testing every day, and the trainers, they're getting by the time you get the testing sent in and they get the results, a lot of times that's 3:34 in the morning. And all of a sudden their phone's going off. You got a positive result. So now the trainers are sending out It's 3:30 in the morning. They're sending out messages to everybody, to myself, to the coaches. Hey, this guy's positive. We got to react to this. What we're going to do, contact tracing, everything else. So it's amazing how many people it affected. And the players did a great job with it, but it was the training staff, the medical staff, our trainers. Anytime our equipment trainers, anytime you go to an arena that had NBA teams playing out of there, they could not. If we flew in there, got in there at 2 a.m, they could not get in the dressing room until 4:35 in the morning because they had to wait for the NBA to clean out their dressing room. Everything had to be disinfected. So the wear and tear and the mental part of the game, it was tough, but I give our players credit. Players, our staff, our coaches, we dealt with it, and you understood it was a day-by-day thing, and whatever the challenge of that day was going to be, you lived with it, and you didn't let it affect your game, and that was kind of how we were. It was the next man up, let's figure this out, and that's where your leadership is so important. That starts with the coaching staff, goes down to your players, your leadership group, but it was the mental part of the game. It was a tough grind. It was a tough grind.
Amazing points. We're going to finalize this amazing panel with probably a little bit of a lightning round and a couple quick questions for all of you, and just some takeaways for a lot of the coaches that are tuned in to our panel here. Kenny, I'll start with you. Intensity for your coach or patience for your coach? If you had to choose one based on your experience.
Patience. Awesome. All right. And Donnie, from your standpoint, you want somebody that's demonstrative when they need to be, or do you prefer somebody that might be a little bit calmer behind the bench and also in practice situations? Calmer. And what about for you, Jim? You want somebody that communicates a lot, or do you prefer somebody that's not as much of a communicator, but maybe is more instructional by way of video and things on the chalkboard and things of that nature? Communicator. So see, those are some real key takeaways for a lot of you. A lot of you existing coaches that are at the NHL level. Some of you are aspiring to transition from maybe assistant goalie coach to head goalie coach. Some of you are aspiring to go from maybe assistant coach to head coach. Some of you are in the minors and play a pivotal role in the growth and development of a lot of these coaches. Some of you are coaching in women's hockey, which I really think can continue to foster development of not only the female players, but also some female members of NHL organizations, as we saw with Megan Duggan just up the road here in Jersey with the New Jersey Devils. A lot of bright minds in the women's and girls game as well. I think in closing, first of all, I just want to thank our three amazing panelists here. We've got a wealth of information. All three of them have been around a very long time with their experience, different situations, bigger budgets, smaller budgets through different eras in the US and Canada, USA Hockey, Hockey Canada, Canadians work in the US and vice versa, and international too for a lot of the international coaches. All three of you have had an international footprint by not only working with your clubs, but also with Hockey Canada, USA Hockey, traveling a lot of the different tournaments. So that really is a wealth of experience for a lot of the coaches that are tuned in here around the world, not only here in the US and in Canada. So I can't thank the three of you enough for sharing some of your pearls of wisdom. I've got a memory like an elephant, so this is going to serve me well too, both in TV world and beyond. But again, thank you guys so much. Thanks so much, Kenny, Jim, Donnie, for sharing some of your insights. This is going to be of immeasurable value to a lot of the coaches that are tuned in here today. I also want to thank Lindsay and Mike at the NHL Coaches Association. I think you're doing outstanding work and providing a great wealth of resources and knowledge for a lot of these coaches as they continue down their path. Thanks so much to the coaches that are out there. It's been a real unique time in terms of, you've heard some of the references from our great panelists talking about the challenges in this last year and a half, both on and off the ice, regardless of what level you're involved in. So thanks so much to all of you. I'm Kevin Weeks, lead analyst on the NHL Network. We appreciate all of you. Continue growing the game, continue serving the game. We're all better because of the game, as the great Wayne Gretzky said. And not for hockey, none of us would probably be here, and we all owe a lot to the game of hockey for what it's done for us and our families. So
God bless, stay healthy, stay safe, and let's hope the world returns to normal as it's continuing to do right now. I'm signing off. Until the next time, be well.